Hello and welcome back. This is Poppy in Watercolor, Part 3. This is a fairly lengthy tutorial and I have broken it into 3 parts in addition to doing a considerable amount of editing to each video so that you can get the full benefit of something of the length of time that it takes to create a more detailed watercolor. And I'm by nature a fairly slow painter, so in editing I've tried to eliminate a lot of those things that become very repetitious. Now, in addition to that, if you're interested in following through with these 3 parts, you can certainly fast forward through the parts that you already understand and get to a part that you need to see. And of course you can also mute if you don't want to listen to my chatter. Usually there's some good jewels in my chatter, so just do as you please. And I will be working on the bud today. It's always a good thing when you're working on a painting, especially one that has such a condensed color like this red, to have something of that color somewhere else in the painting. And I'm going to be doing that today on the bud. And the bud is right here in this little corner. And then I'm going to be working on the leaves. And the first thing I will do before I get started on the leaves is to eliminate some of this marking. And I've already done some drawing, though I'm not intent on doing a detail of these leaves. I will do some details around here and around in this area, but for the most part, they're going to be suggestions of leaves, perhaps in a background, a bit of a fused background. So stay tuned, and we're going to work now on the bud. And let me get this camera situated so that you can see where I'm working. And I know this is going to be a little bit difficult to see because, for one thing, the pencil lines are so light. But I think you'll get the idea anyway. Okay, and as I found from working earlier, this brush, even though it's a large brush, it's called an oval wash by some companies. The brand for this is Impresario, and it's a 6590 oval wash, and it's a number 3-4. And it makes a wonderful point, and it's so much better than some of the other brushes that are made for this same purpose. But my real favorite for details is this reservoir brush by Pentel, and it has a wonderful point on it. And then it's also good for turning on the side to apply broader brushes. But for the moment, I'm going to be just filling in some color on this rosebud without too much concern for detail. And if you haven't been around before, I'm working from this photograph, and you'll notice where the bud is in the photograph. I'm leaving out this purple bud because it really just doesn't fit well with the rest of the color scheme. And I have removed my biscuit from the center of the flower, so I'll be working on that as well today. So for now, I want to avoid this leaf. And as I said, even though your screen will be larger than the screen that I'm seeing through on my video camera, it's still going to be a little bit difficult to see right away what I'm doing. And don't be too concerned about getting exact details on your painting. For one thing, a loose painting is a good thing. But in addition to that, it is not likely any other person in the world is going to have your photograph, the one that you're working from. So they won't be able to look at it and say, oh, that's not right. Now there are some things that will naturally be wrong that will be obvious to the viewer. But I have a leaf going up through here, so I'm trying to avoid that. I'm just going to let that dry for a moment, because it will dry lighter. But while this paint is still wet, actually I'm looking at the highlight area. I'm going to go ahead and lift that out while it's wet. And the technique for lifting color is to begin with a clean brush and then wipe and what it's doing is removing some of the paint while it's still wet. But obviously if you don't keep wiping your brush, you're really not doing that much good. So you see how that paint is lifting. And it's really okay if I lift too much, because I can obviously add more paint when I come back to this. But I didn't want it to dry too dark. And I'm just wiping my brush on a napkin. This is the same sort of thing that I did on the petals over here, to lift paint and give them a natural vine color. Although this bud is going to have a few dark areas, overall it's not going to be as dark as the petals in this poppy over here. But by contrast, the little dark areas will make the other areas stand out more. Okay, when you're trying to control your hard lines, make sure before you leave it to complete the drawing, that you have something related to what you're going to expect when you come back. In other words, I want these to be veins, so I don't want it to dry rounded. And using my oval wash with clean water, I'm going to work over here. This paper is actually pretty good for removing lines like these. Not all papers are. I'll dry that up so it won't make more watermarks. Not quite sure why I have that brown color coming out. Unless, by the way, it's coming from this napkin. Okay, while I'll let that dry, I'm going to work somewhat on the center. Now the biscuit that I had on there was to preserve some of the white areas around the little seeds. Whatever you call these little things in the middle. Bees like them, I think. And here's an example of something I've mentioned in the past in other videos, and that is making sure that you don't have regular patterns in some things. In some situations, you will have regular patterns, but in the case of these seeds coming out of the center here, they're coming out at different levels and in different directions, mostly coming up. So I want to be careful, though, to leave my white spaces in the center here where I have worked so hard to maintain those. And this brush is wonderful for this kind of detail. I think one of the most important things that you learn when you're learning how to paint is you're learning how to see, and maybe I could say just learning how to look. And when you break things down to its basic parts, that's when you begin to be able to see what's in front of you and not be quite so concerned with painting a flower in particular. Betty Fowler's book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, is such a wonderful experience for, especially for beginning artists and artists who think they can't draw. What it amounts to, well, really two things. One is understanding the perspective, the view from which you're seeing this. The view that I have here is slightly over the top, but from the side. So that makes a kind of sense of foreshortening in some areas. But if I paid attention to this flower as a whole, I might get a little lost in it. And frankly, even after I draw it and start to paint it, I'm going back in and I'm looking at every little place where I have a shadow. So then I'm breaking it down to shadow shapes. And so looking at the shapes and the negative space around this flower is quite different than if I were looking straight down on the flower, or if I were looking at it from a straight side view. Then this area in here would be totally different. These petals would not be showing this way. So start paying attention to negative space in the objects that you're drawing and painting from, and from there start to look at shadows and highlights. Those shadows and highlights will direct you as to how to paint that object. And when you're finished, it's surprising what you have. So let me finish up here, and then I'm going to have to bring this shadow down somewhat on this side because I really left too much white. But on the other hand, if I like that much white showing, I can just leave it. Another thing I say on a regular basis about your painting, it's your painting. And just like the difference between a very loose wet on wet watercolor and something like this that's very detailed. It's your painting. It's your painting. And the other thing I say is if you don't like how it's turning out, it's only paper. And in this case, I think I have spent maybe a couple of hours altogether on the painting, which is really not a large investment, though my time is valuable. Okay, there might be some other areas I want to work on once I get my background established. And while I have my red paint going. Well, folks, as you can see, I have moved ahead rather rapidly. I decided that if I taped the whole leaf painting portion, it would be for you like watching ice melt, and I don't want to bore you at all. Although most of my chatter that takes place while I'm painting is a few learning keys, and I repeat them just because I know repetition is helpful. But I want to talk to you at this juncture when I have the painting before you, which I pretty much considered finished until I looked at the photograph and realized that this portion here in the front really has no good connection to the background. So I'm either going to have to diminish this or increase the color on that side. I have also made some decisions about the detail in the leaves. I had said initially that I wasn't going to be very detailed, but the more I worked on the leaves, the more I realized that was going to be necessary. Excuse me, please. And so I have done a lot more detail than I intended to. And a few notes about the leaves and the way I went about this. I used, first of all, negative space painting, and negative space is typically painting the space that doesn't really have an object there. And by painting the negative space, I inadvertently create and design the leaves that go over it. And this particular painting was really significantly difficult in the leaves. Some leaves are easy to paint. These I don't think were, but this was my choice. This was the leaves that go with the poppy in this variety of poppies. So I reconsidered that, and I went as much as I could with the design that I had drawn. And then looking at the photograph, I've been mentioning in the other two videos about the necessity of learning how to see shapes of shadows and highlights. If you paint shapes of shadows and highlights, you are ultimately going to be successful in representing whatever object you're trying to capture in your painting. And that is sort of the basis of the right and left brain hemisphere, in which Betty Fowler talks about in her book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it, especially if you think you don't draw well. But learning how to see trees, for example, in shapes and shadows, you will notice that they're not individual leaves. They become a shape of a clump of leaves that are in shadow, then some that are in highlight. So if you learn how to see, you'll go a long way toward learning how to be a better painter, a better drawer. So I keep emphasizing that along the way in the other two videos. And if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I'd advise you to go back and look at them. They're about 30 minutes each, and you can fast forward through them to get to the points that you think you need to learn. But I offer these tutorials because I'm a teacher, and that's what teachers do. I wanted to say a few more things about this painting, and I've mentioned it before, and unfortunately the Pentel company is not giving me any money for advertisement, but this is the brush that I used, and it was especially good for the details in these leaves because of this very fine point. So I recommend that when you have these kinds of issues. And since this is such a detailed painting, I think it was really necessary. About making corrections, if you need to do some corrections, especially in a detailed painting like this, you can do it by re-wetting the area, but be sure that you cover the whole area. Like this space, for example, if I needed to change that in some way, I would need to wet that whole section to avoid the lines when it dried. A word about matting and framing in terms of watercolors. Make sure that when you finish your painting and take it to the frame shop, that you already have in mind how much of this painting you want to cover up and where you want the mat to go. When I photographed this and put it into my computer, I cropped it where I thought a mat should go. And I actually cropped off a lot of this because I don't want my flower to be so much in the center, although it's pretty dominating with that red color, which is what I meant for it to be. And another point about the color too, red and green are opposites on the color wheel. And in that sense, they are complementary colors. When you have those two colors together, side by side, in the same painting, it creates an energy. Too much of that can cause you to have a headache because it causes your eye to vibrate quickly and will result in a headache. Hopefully that won't happen when you look at this painting. But if you notice, children are always really psyched up at Christmas time. Could it possibly be something besides all the toys they're looking to get from Santa Claus? Well, I jest. Of course it's the toys and stuff they get at Christmas. Okay, so matting and framing. There are several frame companies online that offer very good prices on metal frames, and that's what I usually get if I'm going to mat a painting and put it under glass. Also, I would not use non-glare glass. It's just not as effective as just the regular glass. Now, the technique that I used on this painting was representational and detailed. I don't paint quite this detailed in other media because I just don't. But I did this so that I could do the tutorial for those of you who do like that kind of painting. And on the end of this tutorial, I have some photographs of wet and wet paintings that I've done in watercolor. I've also included one that's mixed media, which is a way to save a watercolor that you may have thrown away by using pastels over it. And it's also a tutorial on YouTube. Now here's my advertisement. I invite you to view other videos on my channel. I have well over 50 now, and some of them are watercolor, some of them are oils, some of them palette knife. There are a few that even suggest ways to revise paintings that you've thrown away. And I also invite you to my website, which is delbaloo.com. I have a page on artwanted.com/Del. Then I have 13, actually there are 15 books on Amazon.com, and they're available on paperback and ebooks. If you have a desire to have an art class in your area, please contact me. I love to travel around. Don't much want to go overseas at this point in time, but if you'd like for me to hold a painting class, please get in touch with me. Also, I teach Bible studies and I teach workshops. One workshop that I enjoy doing over a 2 or even a 3-day weekend is the fine art of worship, in which I teach Christians specifically to use art to express themselves in worship in the sanctuary and in times when they are alone. And so please get in touch with me about that as well. And I thank you for sticking with me on these videos. As I said, if you haven't watched the other 2, parts 1 and 2, I invite you to do that. I am so glad you've joined me, and I thank you for that. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. And I will look forward to being with you again soon. So bye for now.